it's a relatively straightforward thing to read the letters to the 7 churches, as we've done last week. There's not a lot of imagery in there, really, that's confusing. And then you almost jump in from Revelation chapter 4 onwards, and you're like, oh, a totally different thing's going on. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to say is, actually, it's not a totally different thing going on. Really, God's doing exactly the same with chapters 4 to 22. 22? Mm-hmm. Yeah, as he is in 1 to 4, which is to say, I see you, this is who I am, remember who I am, you're doing well, this is my word to you for this moment, and have hope, because I'm going to win it all in the end.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Really does. And I mean, the key kind of call that we looked at was the call to faithful endurance, wasn't it? Patient endurance.
And so that reminds us, this is a pastoral book. Mm-hmm. God could say anything. He could have given us science textbooks. He could have done anything. He doesn't. Mm-hmm. What he's written for us is a pastoral document, which is what we mean is it's a love letter, or it's a letter of guidance to a people. As Paul says in his letter to Timothy, so you can live a good life. It's given you all you need to do well in this earth. Mm-hmm. And so it's a part that it's not, here's every single thing that's going to happen. It's not like, here's a complex, sometimes you can think of it, a Revelation a bit like you're at a foreign language wedding, and you've got a order of service that you're doing in your language, and you're looking at, are we?
Yeah.
I haven't really got a clue what they're saying or doing over there, but we're probably here. Yeah. And that's how some people treat Revelation 4 to 22. They're like, oh, that's just occurred. That means must be. And it's not that. Mm-hmm. It's a letter from God to say, here's how you live.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So it's a bit more here and now than we might have been advertised to. Well,
I mean, as with all the New Testament, it's written by a pastor. Fundamentally, John is a pastor to a congregation.
Yeah.
Now, John's congregation happens to be a very broad group of people across lots of different churches.
Yeah.
He was think of him more like a sort of a bishop or a sort of a national director kind of person. Mm-hmm. And so what he's writing about, the vast majority of it has happened and was going on for the people as they were reading it. Mm-hmm. Now, because it's truth, it's still going on for us now.
Yeah.
And there's some bits of Revelation, which we won't talk about today, but the last few chapters this is really clearly not happened yet, and that will happen in the future. Yeah. That's the have-hope bit. Mm. But the first 18 or so chapters of Revelation are happening now, and have been happening ever since John wrote them.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so we've got these kind of almost guardrails, if you like, isn't it? It's like, we've used the language of journey, and it's kind of, okay, don't veer off too far. It's not like, hey, we've been walking up a mountain and now suddenly we're into a submarine and you need to learn how to use this machinery that you've never used before. We're still walking. We're still called to see Jesus. We're still called to faithful endurance. We're still called to follow him. I mean, that's a clear thing. Even in these chapters, which have a lot of imagery, a lot of different things going on, there's still a kind of clear call, isn't there, to follow the Lamb.
That's it. And there's not a single thing in Revelation that hasn't already been in the other books.
Okay.
So if you read Revelation and think this is totally new information, you're misunderstanding it. Mm-hmm. Because what Revelation is repeating what has been said to already, certainly in the New Testament, but probably all the way through the 65 previous books. Mm-hmm. So again, as you read Revelation, if it doesn't make sense, then and you're thinking maybe it means this, if that isn't in the other books, you're getting it wrong. Mm. It's just explaining again, it's repeating, this is what God's always said he's going to do, this is what Jesus showed he's doing, this is what's happening now, and this is what Jesus is going to do at the end.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Because, I mean, maybe perhaps, we want to be aware of it. One of the weaknesses of this kind of journey, and we've talked about it before with kind of chapter divisions, which weren't there. John's expectation probably was that this letter would be read in one go. Yeah. Maybe allowed to the groups of people that he was writing to. So it's just a kind of little cautionary thing, like, don't forget what we've already established.
Totally. And so just, you will know this, but just to remind us of this, the reality is that John has been sent into a prison on an island. And you think of sort of what the French would do to prisoners. They'd send them off to a place where it's horrific punishment.
Yeah.
And the reason he was done is because he was preaching the gospel. So what you're doing when you're reading Revelation is reading a document that has to get through the censors of the Roman guards and communicate truth to a church who is, if they're found with it, and it says the wrong thing, could be persecuted, killed, and sent to prison. So John deliberately talks in code in some of this letter. So it's everything that's been said before, but it's going to feel really different because this is one of the few pieces of what's called apocalyptic, which is deliberately coded language so that you understand what I'm talking about, because you and I, we have the same code. But this person who's here to watch it and going to check and read it won't know. That makes sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, maybe to push back with a question that some people might be asking. Okay, so he's writing in code. Are you saying then he didn't see these things? That it's not a vision of heaven, that it wasn't a spiritual experience?
Yeah, so, I mean, that is a fair question from the way that I've phrased it. Now, of course, what we say is, well, of course, the Lord is behind, and he's the one saying the things to John, and he knows it has to be in code. And so he shows him images of things which will make sense to the church.
Yeah.
So what might have happened is that John could have seen the image, as it says in the book of Amos, God always reveals his secrets to his prophets, and he speaks in riddles. So what John could have done is decoded the riddle for the church and given the straightforward explanation, the main and the plain.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. He takes the prophetic revelation in its pure form, and he transfers that across.
Yeah.
He doesn't interpret it for them.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
It's good. We've got quite a nuanced understanding of this book, haven't we? It's not the kind of simple, it's not the stone commandments brought down by Moses, is it? There's a wrestling with it, and we've seen that at a few different places. And I mean, we could push on that a lot more, but we want to get into what we're looking at. But it's just to kind of raise a flag. There's nuance here, and it's exciting. It's exciting to get to grips with. Now, one thing I loved in the devotional that you've written, and looking at the devotional for these chapters, is this little idea of advert breaks.
Yeah.
And these visions that we get punctured through the book of Revelation of what seems to be heaven itself. Yeah. So what do you mean by advert breaks?
So I was trying to just think of how can you understand that there's a narrative, like an episode of I was going to say EastEnders, but it couldn't be because it doesn't have adverts.
Coronation Street.
But a football match, it's World Cup at the moment. A football match is going on, and there's a journey that's happening. There's a story that's going on, but you'd take a break away from that story, which is still happening, to see something else.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to communicate with the idea of advert break. Is it's what John does is he shows you what's happening on the earth and how things are unfolding, and then he'll just break away and show, but just let's remember, this is what's happening in the heavenly council. This is what it's all for. This is what everybody's wanting, and this is the response of the people in the heavenly realms when they see and hear what God's doing and planning to do on the earth.
Yeah.
So it's like you've got these two things, and remember what we said is that heaven and earth are hitting into each other, and eventually will become one. So what we're doing is we're looking at stuff that's kind of like going on the earth, and then there's a moment. Let's just go back up, see what's happening in the heavens. And that's what we're calling the advert break.
Yeah.
And they're nearly always overflowing with worship. They're nearly always singing.
Yeah.
And they're always people centered around the Lamb.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it would just be good to read out some of this. This from chapter 4. One of these breaks up into the heavenly realm that we see. In the centre, around the throne, were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and behind. The first living creature was like a lion, the second was like an ox, the third had the face like a man, the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and were covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, "Holy, holy, Holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honour and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns down before him and say, "You are worthy, our Lord, our God, to receive glory and honour and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being."
So isn't that just sublime and just this incredible moment? And so what we're seeing here is really God's war council. And what we just unambiguously are told is that God is never, ever remotely flustered or concerned about the battle that he's engaged in. And anybody who sees God never has the slightest shadow of a doubt that he is utterly and totally sovereign and utterly and totally brilliant. Like his plan and all, he's just the greatest battle champion, like strategist. They're like, you are just amazing.
Yeah.
And that's the vision, because if you're on the ground in Rome or in Ephesus and you're worried that the next knock on the door is going to be a soldier who's going to drag you off and send you off to an island or maybe take you to be killed, you're worried, like, is God in control?
Yeah.
Am I okay here?
Yeah.
And then there's this advert break of, he's utterly in control. He's totally serene. He's unmoved. Nothing that's occurring is flustering him. It's all okay.
Yeah.
Now there's pain. There's tribulation.
Yeah.
There's tribulation. So don't misunderstand his sovereignty and his serenity as not being this tribulation. There's hardship, but he's like, but this hardship, it's all right. It's all factored in.
Yeah.
I know all what it is. Nothing they do to you is beyond anything that I'll allow. Nothing that they'll do to you is going to in any way jeopardize your future. I am the God, and I've got it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to win this whole thing back.
It's amazing, isn't it? And I mean, as you alluded to earlier, that's not new. That's throughout the scriptures. But there is something about the advert break, as we called it, the revelation of what's going on in the heavens. I don't know what it does for your heart, but for me, I'm like, oh, I'm not pleased that's going on.
Yeah. And so what's really fascinating is you get that in 4 and 5, and then actually something's added into that space in chapter 7, which is then this heavenly council. And this is like God is present, he's sovereign, serene. And then like somebody brings, there's a knock on the door, as it were. Yeah. And somebody brings in some of the martyrs.
Yeah.
So these are, think about this, in your church there was Brother Joseph and Martha, who had recently been taken off to prison and they'd been killed for their faith. Yeah. And you look around the room and they're not there, and then you read this and you hear this and you're like, they have been led into the heavenly council and they're calling upon God and say, our prayers that we prayed when we were alive that you would act, we see you're answering our prayers. You will answer our prayers. And they fall down in adoration and worship to say, you do know what you're doing. Yeah. And so what you get in the heavenly council is the sense that there's representatives of the church on earth who are present right now in the heavenly realms. Yeah. And what I love so much about this, Andy, is that the prayers that I prayed now are still in heaven after I die. And there's something about, if you choose to live a life of faithful endurance, like just living a life of faith, it may be that when you die, you will be brought before the throne to advocate for and champion the kingdom of God coming on this earth. Yeah. And God himself will look at you and he'll say, I'm doing it, and you will fall on your face in worship. Yeah. And the picture of that is so phenomenal, because it takes the significance of your life to not only a cosmic level, but also to eternal. Like, you yourself could stand before that throne. Yeah.
Yeah. Am I right to reference back just this idea of there being nothing new? But the story that comes to mind when we're talking about these prayers still being alive after we died is Cornelius. Your prayers have come up as a memorial before me. And I mean, Cornelius had a pretty spectacular story and a heavenly thing, but his experience would have been very earthly. Oh. It would have been praying in a boring room. It would have been boring prayer meetings. But you see it, and it's come up before God, and it's altered histories and destinies.
I mean, imagine if you're, say, as I just think of people in our church, their parents and their kids have gone wayward, and they've prayed and they've prayed and they've prayed, and there'll be moments where they sit there and think, what's the point in me praying for my son? There's no evidence he's turning back at all. And what you find is that prayer has been taken before and it might be that you at the point after you die, or maybe even right now, somebody is standing in heaven and saying, you see these prayers, they're not just for this son of this parent, they're for every prodigal son who's gone off. And God, will you answer them? And God's like, I will answer those prayers. And it's something that just becomes so cosmic and huge that means that you may be disempowered. It may feel like your prayers are not being answered right now, but your prayers are before the Lord.
Yeah.
And those who see him, all they do when they see what he does in response to the prayers that are prayed, every prayer prayed, is fall on their face in worship and sing. Yeah. You're worthy. Hallelujah.
Yeah. And so prayer is a key part of faithful endurance, isn't it? Patient endurance, to go on praying. It's that kind of Luke 18 thing. The question isn't, will God be faithful in the answers to his prayers? He will be. We'll see that. The question is, will he find faith on the earth?
Will you be faithful in your prayers?
Will you keep going?
And so maybe you pray, like keep going, and maybe it's waned. Maybe your prayer life has stalled, and you kind of think, I don't pray like I used to. Just get back on the horse.
Yeah, keep going. It's part of patient endurance. One thing that this kind of idea of heavenly counsel, which we're seeing in John's vision. There's not really many references to it in the New Testament that we could maybe point to, obviously, but the book of Job from the Old Testament, that's got quite a clear, open advert, to use that language again, into the heavenly council, hasn't it? We've seen this before.
and so the book of Job speaks into the same thing here, which is to say that if your eyes are purely on what's happening on this earth, you're lacking wisdom. That's what Job's friends did.
Yeah.
They didn't understand. And the whole point of the book of Job is, if you are too small human being to get the whole picture of what's going on here. If you open your eyes, you'll see there's a heavenly council and things are going on up there. And you can, in your prayers, actually almost enter the heavenly council and put your petitions forward. Yeah. It's just that constant encouragement the Bible tells us, like, don't get too fixed on just what you can see in front of you. Remember, there's a whole heavenly council.
Yeah. Yeah. And to kind of help us a bit more, again, it brings us back to that knowledge of heaven, the heavenly realm and the earthly realm continually crashing into each other, and one day heaven kind of enveloping the earth rather than a place off in another galaxy when we die.
Yeah, that's right. The intertwining of heaven and earth. In chapter 10, we see an angel who stands with one foot on the sea and one foot on the land. And it's just all over the place. Like, the heavenly reality is present in this earth. Yeah. In lots of ways we don't see. But it fundamentally and totally and absolutely is present.
Yeah. Amazing. So let's maybe get into a few of the perhaps we might call knottier bits. Yeah. Lots of sevens coming up in these chapters. We've got 7 seals, the 7th of which leads on to 7 trumpets. So have you got any help? Got a bit of a map reference for us on these 7s?
Yeah, so 7 is all over the place, and we'll talk about some of the images that we'll see in a minute, because this is some of the codes that John hasn't interpreted because he knows people will get it. But 7 is a number that's very biblical, and it's a sort of perfection, right? So what this basically, when you read 7, what it basically means is God's like, yeah, I got this. Yeah, I know what I'm doing. This is it. This is the completeness. This is what we're doing. This is going to give you the whole picture. That's what it means.
Yeah, and again, even that in itself spurs patient endurance, doesn't it? We're following one who sees everything, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. There's nothing lacking. There's no hidden plot twist that he's not aware of.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. So just, I don't know if you find this, Andy, but when I read through, even though I've thought about this a lot and read this a lot and looked back and found all the Old Testament, images that are being referenced, still when I read through these chapters, I come out in a bit of a cold sweat and I think, what the heck is this about? What?
Yeah.
So we're going to try to unpick it a bit for you now, aren't we? So there's a bit of detail here, which we haven't often done in these things, but it's just probably worth it.
And even if it's so rich. We found that everywhere in the New Testament. You could do 30-minute episodes on most verses, so that we've always had to pick and choose a little bit. But as we look at these, one of the things it does is just show, do you know what, we could do this for all of them. You could do this for all of them in terms of there's richness and there's depth, and the harder you push on things, the more it gives its gold to you, doesn't it?
Yeah. So let's talk about the scroll with the 7 seals. So the scroll that's referenced is almost certainly a reference back to 2 Old Testament passages. In Ezekiel chapter 2, where Ezekiel is given a scroll by God, and he said, unroll it. And it's a scroll that it renounces judgment on unfaithful Israel. And it's a scroll that's woe and lamentation and mourning. And so Ezekiel gets that scroll, and then Daniel the prophet gets years later. Ezekiel is just as they're entering exile, and Daniel is once they've been in exile for a while. And Daniel, in Daniel chapter 12, sees a vision of a scroll, and he's told, bind it up and don't let anybody open this until the end times. Yeah. So scroll, Ezekiel, it's judgment. Daniel, the shift from Ezekiel to Daniel is, what Daniel says is, what's happening in just to Israel through Ezekiel is going to happen to the whole earth. So God's work to refine and then ultimately in Ezekiel to breathe, the valley of bones, to resurrect Israel from this place of woe and loss. Daniel's like, that's going to happen to the whole earth. So not only is it going to be on particular people, but all of creation is going to have this sort of decreation moment, but then there's going to be this breath coming in, and a kingdom, Son of Man's going to come, and Jesus quotes Daniel all the time. So this is a scroll. Okay, so when you read the scroll, that's what you're thinking of.
Daniel and Ezekiel. Yeah.
What you find is that then basically what Revelation is saying is, this is the end time plan that God has always had. Okay. Right? He's not changed his plans.
Yeah.
Ezekiel saw this. Daniel saw this. It's happening here.
Yeah.
We're seeing it, and it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening because Jesus has come.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So we're in the end times. John's telling them that when he's on Patmos. He's in the end times. We continue to be in those times.
So just to kind of keep asking the clarifying questions, we have been in end times for over 2,000 years then.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we're not looking to any future time to be a more significant end times. This is it. We're in it.
Okay.
If we read these passages and understand these images.
Yeah.
The scroll has been opened.
The scroll's been opened. We see this here.
Jesus opens the scroll. That tells us this is what's happening at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is quite cool, because you sort of think, oh right, Daniel opened it. Yeah. It wasn't allowed to tell anyone about it because nobody's worthy. Same thing. So Daniel got a little sneak preview.
Yeah.
So then we see 4 horses, which have been often popularised as the horsemen of the apocalypse or whatever. So horses is in Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah. And in the prophet Zechariah, what God does is he's sends out his minions on horses to act as sort of his. They go out to the ends of the earth to patrol and to see what's happening. And there's 4 because in Hebrew time there's the 4 winds. They knew the earth wasn't split into 4, but a little bit like we'd have north, south, east, and west. Sure. The idea is that basically they're going everywhere, and they're going on God's behalf to patrol and check on everything that's occurring.
Yeah.
And if you look at what the horses see happening is that they kind of seem to allow or bring with them or permit decreation work. So if you look at the first 7 days of creation according to Genesis 1 and then look at what's happening here, it's almost like an undoing of those days of creation.
Okay.
So there's like things start to the trees and there's like a plague and there's things that are coming in and decreating the earth.
Yeah.
And this is all part of the scroll that's the scroll of judgment.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And that's happening now.
That's happening. That was happening in the Roman times.
Yeah.
That's happened. That's continuing to occur now.
Okay.
And so we see there's a rider on a white horse. Now this isn't Jesus. This is an angel who looks a bit like his boss.
Mm-hmm.
So he's one of the four. And what this enables us to do, this is really important for us to understand, is what judgment is.
Yeah.
Because what I don't know about you, but I often thought of judgment was, here's the earth, right, okay, this is the earth, and this is fine, it's kind of on its own, it's living as it is,
yeah.
And God from the outside comes in and says, right, I'm going to impose judgment on this, and I'm going to make it break.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it sounds like decreation is.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing here is the image is much more like this. God is the one who is the soil, and he's the water, and there's the sustenance for this to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And what occurred is that when people rejected him and rebelled against him, is chaos, like total chaos, came into this space.
Mm-hmm.
And the decreative forces of sin and the devil and evil already began to cause this to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And God, in his kindness, kept on holding it together.
Mm.
He held it together in his kindness. And what judgment is where God begins to release and loosen some of the holding together work that he's been doing on creation. Like this stuff that people have decided to put into this world, he's like, okay, I'm going to let that actually have a bit of space. I can't forever be the helicopter parent who's sorting every problem that humans are creating before they even gets. I've got to give them the space.
Yeah.
And the horses, in that sense, are actually their main job in patrolling is to ensure that the decreating work doesn't go too far.
Mm-hmm.
So even now, he's holding back and restraining some of the utter chaos that would fall on the earth if the horses weren't there.
How does that knowledge bring us to patient endurance, faithful endurance?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one thing that is super helpful to do is to ask yourself, what do you actually look at the world as if evil exists? Mm. Now, for some of you watching this, you're going to be like, well, it's caused me so many scars, I can't even imagine looking at the world without evil existing. But for others of us, we actually really genuinely have learned to look at the world as if, well, actually, it's all quite nice. And it's coming towards Christmas is one of these prime moments for this. Like what we do at Christmas is we put tinsel on, we have nice flashing lights, and we sing happy songs, and we kind of, everything is about, the world's actually quite a nice place. Mm. And what we try and push out of the way is any sense that there is genuine, real evil. Mm. There is genuine, real danger. And the tragedy of Christmas is, of course, that for some people, they feel that and taste that Christmas more than ever. But what is sobering about the book of Revelation is if any of us believe the lie that the world's actually, we're all fundamentally good, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, man is born free, everywhere is in change, the evil in the world is just what people do, nobody's born racist, they learn to be racist. All these ideas that actually fundamentally we're good, fundamentally everything's fine, if we could just stop people teaching each other or doing bad things to each other, everything would be fine. If you believe that lie, then you'll find Revelation incredibly difficult to read. Yeah. But if you believe the overall story of the Bible, which is there's a fundamental issue in this creation and in your heart, Andy, and in my heart. It's called sin. It's an inclination towards evil. And Jesus has come to deal with it, but he hasn't yet fully removed sin, evil, death off this earth. Yeah. Then you can read it and think, and now he's giving the treatment that does remove sin, death, and evil off the earth. Yeah.